I'm Professor Green, and this is Chapter 15, Part 3 of 3. So as I mentioned in Part 2, let's continue on and finish up the managing a global supply chain. There are 4 important areas when we talk about an efficient supply chain. We're going to talk about in the next couple of slides, just-in-time, JIT inventory, information technology like ERP systems, which might sound familiar, coordination, and then interorganizational relationships, and about how is it important to trust and feel a sense of commitment from the people that you work with. So let's talk about just-in-time inventory. This was, again, a really big topic when I went to business school, because it was kind of evolving 20 years ago. That's the idea that you could have this inventory right before you need it, right? As we said, Dell is a really good example of an organization that does this. They have just 3 days worth of inventory in their warehouse in Texas. And then after that, they need to pull from warehouses abroad. And so they're able to save costs on the warehouse space in the US. So what this does is it economizes on inventory holding costs by having the materials, right, arrive just in time to enter the production process. So, well, Dell is the kind of like the finished product for the most part, but we're also talking about having the supplies arrive just in time. This can result in major cost savings from reducing warehouse and inventory holding costs, can help firms spot defective parts and take them out of the process to boost product quality. So you see them ahead of time in a supplier's warehouse, and then you can quickly change and get it from another supplier potentially. But it leaves a firm without a buffer stock of inventory, which can be scary, and it makes it difficult to respond quickly to problems. And that's why the author, if you watch the video in the textbook, he talks about how the pandemic, was really problematic, that all of a sudden people weren't able to get their Amazon packages, lots of different things, because we don't keep as much inventory in the US potentially as we do in China. In the real world, outside of the pandemic, what companies will do is to reduce the risk of not getting the product on time. They might have different suppliers from different sources, different products supplied from different sources, so that if one supplier fails and isn't able to come up with the goods on time, then they could switch quickly to somebody else. So let's talk a little bit about the role of information technology. Allows the firms to optimize the production scheduling. So as you can imagine, there are lots of opportunity here for making sure that we can track all these things. There's something called the electronic data interchange, the EDI. You might be more familiar with something called the ERP, the Enterprise Resource Planning. Again, when I graduated in 1997, people were getting certified from Oracle and a whole bunch of other firms to become ERP experts, because there was so much money invested in making sure that we could very quickly and easily see where a product was at any moment in time. Thankfully, it's become less expensive now, so you don't have to invest in a huge software like Oracle, making it easier for companies of all different sizes to access. You don't need to have a consultant and teams come to your organization for weeks on end to implement a software. You can buy something that's internet-based and a lot simpler to manage. Blockchain technology is an additional layer in the system, and that's really an exciting place, I think, right? Different from crypto. It's the technology behind crypto, and allows us to very quickly connect nodes and different pieces of the supply chain. Definitely a nice, quickly and evolving piece of the world. Now we're going to talk about the coordination of global supply chains. So this is that shared decision-making between the different activities. So when we have more shared decisions, it's a more integrated, efficient, effective supply chain. And so there's some objectives here that we want to make sure that we accomplish when we talk about coordination. The first one is responsiveness. So can we respond in a timely manner to changes in the product or customization? Can we work with variance reduction? This helps helps eliminate disruptions. So again, if there's somebody or a supplier that can't produce, can we very quickly move to a different supplier? Inventory reduction. If there's if there's lower inventory that's not available, shipment consolidation, can we move smaller shipments into one bigger shipment to save costs? Quality, looking at zero defects, as we spoke about in this chapter, the importance of making sure that all the products that go out are of top quality, because there's a lot of cost that goes in with returning those products. And that's what leads into the last bullet point here: life cycle support, customer service. How do you allow returns? Is there recycling? How do you handle product recalls, etc.? All this is part of managing a global supply chain. So interorganizational relationships. Now we're going to talk a little bit about vendors and suppliers and how this whole thing, how the kind of the organizational behavior kind of piece of it, how are things really done around here? The key part that the author wants to tell us is that trust and commitment are super important to an efficient and effective global supply chain. He says if there's 100% trust and there's 100% commitment between organizations and their suppliers or the buyers, et cetera, then we would have no problems and life would be good. But that's not the truth, right? That's not actually how things work. So what he did was he created two different slides here talking about the upstream and the downstream relationships and the progression. So first you might, if you talk about upstream, right? So talking about people that you get the products from, first you might work with what you call a vendor. There's a little bit of lower coordination here, low integration. It's kind of a transactional focus. You buy 100 things and then that's it. Then it's over. Maybe you connect with them in a year or two. Then maybe you start to order more often, and you come into what's called a supplier relationship with them. And you can see now the coordination is getting a little bit better. There's more integration, and there's more like a long-term relationship focus. And then eventually you consider them a partner, and you really work hand in hand. Right. Nike has lots of partners because they just have a steady stream of product. Apple, as we know, works with unfortunately, very often just a handful of partners, because they have just so much product coming through and they really depend on just one or two different suppliers, because those are the only people that they trust to make the products that go into our cell phones and laptops, etc. The next slide is about the downstream. And so this is your buyers, a customer, and then you become a client eventually. So again, a buyer would be somebody who purchases your product maybe once a year. There's low coordination, low integrations, more of a transaction. Then eventually they become what's called a customer, a more regular transaction. And then eventually we would call them a client. So this ends chapter 15. Let's go through the summary. We explained why global production and supply chain management are of really central importance to many global companies, because it really can make or break your revenue, help or hurt your profits. We explained how country differences, production technology, and production factors all affect the choice of where to locate production activities, that there are so many different factors that go into making those decisions. We recognize the role of foreign subsidiaries and how it can be enhanced over time as they accumulate knowledge and they become, more of a partner, and they know more and more about your product. Identify the factors that influence a firm decision of whether to source supplies from within the company or from suppliers. So to make or to buy, we went through that flow chart as to all the different factors to consider if you think you want to make or buy a product. And then we understood the functions of logistics and purchasing within global supply chains. Understanding how that all works and the different levels. And then lastly, we described what is required to efficiently manage a global supply chain, talking about commitments and trust, and moving forward in partnership with many of our of our vendors. Great. So let's go ahead and we'll stop here for chapter 15, and I will see you again in our final two chapters, chapters 16 and 17.